All right, we've been looking at the issues from the great and global, international, and even cosmic perspective, and I'd like to bring us down in this part to the very parochial, of which we all have experience here. Anybody who goes to a parish, a church of any kind, knows what parochial life is about. And fortunately, in the Christian tradition, we have the benefit of a bird's eye view of a parish life in the first century. The years 49, 51, something like that, the first century. We have St. Paul's two letters to the Corinthians. He also wrote the Romans from Corinth, so we get some perspective there. So we have a very textured picture of what life is like in a community. And as if you read the assigned 1 Corinthians before coming to the class, and if you've read it before, whether first or second, you know that this was not a perfect community. And my guess is that you probably also have belonged to parish communities that are not perfect. Unless, of course, you go to Father Raphael's parish here in Cambridge. So I'd like to look at this whole question of diversity and difference and division from the perspective of the micro, from the parish, but from the ancient parish of St. Paul in Corinth. I will give you an outline, not just an outline, but I'll actually give you a handout, but I'll give it to you a little later. It'll force you to do some work. But this is what I'd like to talk about over the course of this next hour and a half or so, and it'll include breaks when we have some conversations about different questions. First of all, about the community in Corinth, differences and divisions in that community, St. Paul's approach for addressing those kinds of differences and divisions, and the whole question of what is a church dividing issue, which were issues that he, of all the different things he looked at, which were ones he was especially concerned about and which he thought were matters of indifference. Then I'd like to look at differences and division today, especially your own experience of divisions. Again, not on the global, international level of what's happening in Ukraine and the ecumenical patriarchate in Moscow, but your own experience of differences and divisions in church life. And then I'd like to look at, as a final way to end this, divine guidance and discernment. Because the whole question of how do you decide what is just a plain old neutral difference about whether you sing certain things or dance or whether something really is of dogmatic significance that requires a division. This is something that requires discernment, and that means divine guidance. I've been thinking a lot about divine guidance because I have a book coming out on this subject in January, so this helped me to put out a few things. I've been working on the book for 25 years, so that's another story. Anyway, that's what I'd like to look at in the next little while. First of all, the community in Corinth, and I pronounce St. Paul. A diverse community in Corinth, just about as all his communities. A mixed community drawn from Jewish believers, Greeks, Romans, Gentiles and Jews, probably about 50 or 60 people, it's the best guess. If you look at Acts chapter 18 and 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and also Romans, you get something of a picture of what was going on. There was a lot of back and forth travel, so that Paul could write from Corinth, he could write to the Romans, and there were friends in common. You read the last chapter of Romans, and you see that there are many, many people that he's greeting. It's because he had personal relations, and the distance, although we think of it as it must have been terrible, there was a lot of travel. And so Paul, in Corinth and in Rome and in other places, he's got this great network of friends. So technical difficulties here. Oops. Go back here. Can you see this well enough? This is ancient Corinth. When I was living in Cambridge in the 90s, I was working at just up the road, Tyndale House, which is a fantastic biblical research library. I was doing my PhD in Thessaloniki, lived there for a year with our family, but then the faculty said, you need to find a library, a specialist library, and they suggested coming to Cambridge, which was like, I died and went to heaven. Came to Cambridge, working in this biblical research library, and then other libraries of Cambridge. And during that time, I went on a trip with a friend of mine, Gene Green, who now teaches New Testament at Wheaton College in the United States. And the two of us went to ancient Corinth. He'd been there before, so he was a good guide. And here is ancient Corinth. You see in the background the mountain called Corinth. And then this is the main street, Lycaon Road, and there are remains of shops. It's very easy to picture Paul being in that environment, having a shop, putting together tents, doing his ministry alongside of that, and having friends, being a very kind of chatty, social kind of person. And plenty of the remains are there, so you have a very lively sense of the town that Paul served. This is Corinth from above. This is from Corinth, on the top of the mountain. And over on this side is the Gulf of Corinth. This is modern Corinth over here, but ancient Corinth would be around here. And on the other side is the Saronic Gulf. Way over here is Athens. Over here is Mount Parnassus and Delphi. In the middle, you have the Isthmus of Corinth. You might have heard of the famous Isthmian Games. It's a tough word to say. Isthmian Games, parallel to the Olympic Games, happening in this area, ancient times and during the time of Paul. So this is the countryside of Corinth. Here more of Corinth, the Temple of Apollo. Corinth, of course, was an ancient city, but had been destroyed by the Romans and then rebuilt as a colony in 44 BC as a Roman colony. So it was deliberately settled by mostly Roman soldiers or veterans, had a very strong Roman cast to it. Emperor Augustus had taken the god Apollo as his patron, felt that he was the kind of the embodiment of God on earth, the god Apollo. So wherever there were Roman colonies, you found temples of Apollo going up. This is the fountain of Glauci. There are many ancient mythical stories that were associated with Corinth, and this was one of them. You might remember the Greek myth of Jason and the Argonauts. Jason had fallen in love with Medea, and they had a very torrid affair, and then he dumped her. And he went after Glauci, who was the daughter of the king of Corinth, and Medea was not happy. When they were being married, she sent a wedding gift, a beautiful gown, which turned out to be a poisoned magical gown, and that anybody who wore it would be burned to death. Well, she was burned to death. This fountain is in memory of Glauci. There's a whole other piece to it, the story, but you get the idea. Here's the remains of the temple of Asclepios. Asclepios, the god of healing. This would have been in the time of Paul as well, a major center. In fact, it was the first temple that the Roman colonists rebuilt. It was a temple of healing. People get sick, so it's obviously at the top of their minds to get a place where there could be healing. All manner of cures were effected in the temple, but the most interesting was that they would sleep in the temple, and they would then listen to the dreams that they had, and they'd bring the dreams to the priest, and then get the advice of the priest on how that dream was related to their healing. What kind of medicines were necessary, what kind of votive offerings they might be needed to offer. There's a whole museum in this ancient Corinth which shows various body parts, arms, legs, heads, breasts, testicles that needed healing, and that in thanksgiving for healing, these votive offerings were left. You can still see these in modern Greek churches, by the way, right? Little metal amulets that are left on icons as a thanksgiving offering for healing. So the temple of Asclepius, the god of healing, was an important place in Corinth, ancient Corinth. And besides having this healing function, it also had a social function. So just like you might rent a church hall for a wedding, a baptism, or have a meal for a funeral, so the temple of Asclepius also served that function. This is what will cause some difficulty for Christians, because if you're going to be social and you're going to go to a meal, you might find yourself having a meal in a pagan temple for strictly social reasons. You weren't interested in worshiping Asclepius, but you did want to be with your family and your friends and have the meal. So that was part of Corinth. Here again, shops in better condition, the temple of Apollo. Here's one of my favorites. These are the public toilets. They had an extremely effective system in Roman Corinth. The water flowed, had a very sophisticated system for the flow of water, and you can imagine people having little conversations there. I don't know what the coverings looked like, but it was clear that this was also a social place. We have a few intriguing things about Corinth and its relation to the New Testament. This is what's called the Erastus inscription. In the Romans chapter 16, verse 23, it says, Gaius, who is host to me and to the whole church, greets you. Erastus, the city treasurer, and our brother Quartus greets you. There has been a lot of speculation since this particular inscription was found, which says, Erastus, in return for his ship, laid the pavement at his own expense. A lot of speculation that the Erastus that Paul mentions as his friend, as the city treasurer, was also this same Erastus. So not everybody was poor or unknown. The speculation is, and there is no definitive answer, but the thought is that there were some in the Corinthian community who had a degree of social and political and financial responsibility, including perhaps this Erastus. He's mentioned elsewhere in the New Testament as well. Then there's this very interesting place. You remember that Paul was brought before the local governor, Gallio, and this is the place that he would have stood. This was Gallio's tribunal. It's still marked in ancient Corinth. We know that Gallio was there around the year 51, as that helps to date Paul's travels. He was the proconsul of Achaia in Greece, and he has also an interesting history. He was the brother of Seneca, the philosopher Seneca. And we know some of this because there is an inscription just across the Gulf, the Corinthian Gulf. There is an inscription that names Gallio, an inscription that comes from the year 52, and it's at Delphi. This is the Temple of Apollo in Delphi. And this is the inscription. Actually, this is a reconstructed. There were 9 little pieces that scholars were able to piece together. This is called the Gallio inscription, and it helps us know that around 52 AD, the Emperor Claudius, wrote this inscription, and it's basically talking about his friend Gallio, and I'll just show you the next slide. I won't do the Greek, but the blue pieces are reconstructed, the black is what's there. What scholars are able to find, that the inscription is talking about the interest Gallio had in building up Delphi. It used to be a great place with lots of people. Now apparently, according to Gallio, the town had been decimated, there wasn't anybody there, and Claudius wanted to build it up again. So this is the basic subject, but we know that it came from the year 52. And that too then is a good marker for what was going on, what years Paul was in Corinth and in Greece. So, now, we know that in this nice little community, this mixed community, Jews and Gentiles, there were divisions. I'm going to spare the time right now. We won't put you in small groups just right now, so we'll do this together. But based on your reading of 1 Corinthians, what kinds of subjects were there differences and divisions? What were the subjects? Wealth. Sexual immorality. Who baptized who? Marriage. Unmarriage. Role of women. Right. There were a lot of issues going on. I remember my lately deceased friend, in fact, my predecessor. I serve a parish in Bridgeport, Connecticut right now. And the predecessor is Father Stephen Bolanek, a wonderful priest. Father Raphael and Carolyn knew. When he was first a priest, back in the early 80s, he was serving a tiny parish with 12 people in it, north of New York City, Pearl River. And I asked him, I wasn't a priest yet, but I asked him, so what's it like being a priest? And he said, you know, among those 12 people, I think I've encountered every possible human issue. So when you look at 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and you see all the issues that Paul's dealing with, this is very typical of parochial life. People have issues, and Paul was encountering them. Okay, so here are, now you can have the handout. I hope there's enough here. Just pass this. So you don't have to take notes on this detail stuff. So what I've given you here is just a list, chapter by chapter, section by section, of the kinds of issues that Paul was dealing with. Some of the issues the Corinthians themselves had brought to his attention. They'd written to him with some issues. For example, about the married and the unmarried, or about meat offered to idols. So they themselves were acknowledging that they had some questions that they needed his advice on, because there were differences and even divisions among them. But there were also issues that they did not want to talk about. Issues they did not want to talk about. And one of them was the fact that they had very serious factions in this community. So they were writing to him, painting a kind of nice picture. Like, we've got some intellectual issues going on here. And Paul then had to write to them and say, wait a minute, I've heard from Chloe's people. In other words, he'd heard by the grapevine. He had friends there. He knew what was going on. He'd heard that there are real serious divisions among you. So partisanship is something they had not mentioned. He mentions it. So Paul is always the direct kind. He doesn't hide it. Which again, I mean, we never reflect on this, but it's really important that the Christian church has preserved this. It does not hide it. We get embarrassed about a lot of stuff in church life. Paul was not embarrassed. He's writing it. He's telling them, circulate the letters amongst yourselves. He wants people to deal with reality, and that's what Paul is doing. So, partisanship, jealousy and strife, people puffed up and arrogant towards each other and towards Paul, public immorality being tolerated, lawsuits brought against each other. Keep in mind, this is 50, 60 people, right? Laxity and libertinism, issues about marriage, the unmarried, circumcision, uncircumcision, whether you're a slave or free, how do you deal with that? Food offered to idols and sold in the marketplace, disputes over Paul's rights as an apostle. What about frequenting pagan temples like the Asclepion? Self-preoccupation versus concern for the other. And then he deals with a lot of liturgical issues, hairstyles and coverings, inequality, especially income inequality, separation at meals, the disputed value of spiritual gifts. And then he's tucked in there in chapter 13, where does love fit into all of this? faith, hope, and love. Then more liturgical issues. The spiritual gifts, speaking in tongues, disorder in worship. Liturgical issues, particularly around disruptive women, if that's what it was. And in chapter 15, have they forgotten the core of the gospel message? Different views of resurrection, some saying that there is no resurrection, it's already gone. And then right at the very end, trouble with the collection for the poor in Jerusalem. They had been making all kinds of promises about delivering their gift, and they didn't come through. So he's gently and not so gently saying, I'll collect it when I come, so you better start now. Okay. Again, we're not going to break right now into smaller groups because I'm conscious of the time. But I do want to get your thoughts on how Paul was approaching some of these different issues based on your own readings. Your thoughts on how Paul was approaching differences and divisions. Did he just throw up his hands and say, forget this, I'm going elsewhere?
Synagogue.
Synagogue.
Oh, if it was one. Temple.
What do you mean?
Marketplace.
I mean, he went elsewhere. He went somewhere else?
Where people could come together.
Well, here we're talking about the people who had already come together. It's true. He started in the synagogue and then he moved across the street, not to the other side of town. But here, these are the people who are the faithful. They've come together. They're writing to him. He was there for 18 months, and now he sees all that's going on. Yes?
Well, the partisanship and the public immorality is right straight in the face. I mean, you're doing it, stop it, Christ isn't divided, I'm glad I didn't baptize any of you, except maybe a few, is what he says. And then the public immorality, he's right on.
Right. So their public immorality, they're thinking, well, that's okay. We're tolerant. We believe in freedom. It's okay. And like you say, he's right on it. Are there other issues, though, where he doesn't feel quite so strongly about that?
Just think how you look to outsiders. And you've got to present, if you all go screaming in church and do stupid things and row with each other, people will think you don't know what you're talking about amongst yourselves.
You don't know what you're talking about amongst yourselves. So how outsiders look at what you're doing? Yep.
Sometimes he differentiates between what the Holy Spirit says and his own opinion, which is interesting.
Okay. Very, very much so.
Marriage, he kind of seems to leave it up to the individual to decide what is best for them.
Right.
Issues about food.
Okay.
And how they need to respond, or how they should respond to whether you eat in the temple or whether you eat food offered to idols or not.
Right, because the issue was, as I said, some people were going to the pagan temples for social occasions. There was also an issue about food that had been offered in temples and was being sold in the marketplace. It was a very standard thing to do that. So basically, you'd be starving yourself if you weren't eating the meat offered in the marketplace, or you became a vegetarian. So Paul is able to make distinctions about issues he regards as extremely important: public immorality, major divisions, but he was also giving some issues up to individuals. Yeah.
In Corinth, when St. Paul mentioned to the women to cover their heads to differentiate from prostitutes.
That's a disputed thing, but yes, how they were covering their hair, or what kind of hair coverings they were using, or what kind of hairstyles they were using.
I
think in chapter
circumcision, non-circumcision.
I think in chapter 15 he is actually reiterating the message of the Bible.
Chapter 15, the very first message that he gave them, he wants them to keep putting everything in perspective of the gospel of Christ that he first preached. He doesn't want them to lose track of what that was about, because that's central, and he's worried that they're getting distracted by a lot of other little things. Yes?
And he puts the Eucharist in front of them.
In chapter 11, he's talking about the Eucharist and how he, again, talked to them about the Eucharist when he was first there. And don't you remember?
And he
It reminds
says,
me of centrality of love, I guess.
Chapter 13, the centrality of love. What do you think I mean, everybody talks about love these days. That's even standard wedding reading, right? Chapter 13, Corinthians. What would be his image of love?
Christ.
Christ what?
It's a common, it's not, it's commonly said, and many people know this, that if you read that passage where it says love, you put Jesus or Christ, you get a portrait of Christ.
You get a portrait of Christ, but it's especially, one of my favorite verses is, I decided to do nothing among you except Christ and Him crucified.
Right.
So when he's thinking about love, it is, someone used the phrase, it's not sentimental love. It is a crucified love of Christ. It is a very concrete image of what love looks like. Okay. In all of this, there were some issues that were church dividing. We named a couple of them, right? Public immorality.
he says there are Greeks and Jews, slaves and free. There are differences amongst you, but get over it.
Get over it. At the very beginning, it's interesting. In chapter 1, he says, what I mean is that each one of you says, I belong to Paul, or I belong to Apollos, or I belong to Cephas, or I belong to Christ. Is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Or were you baptized in the name of Paul? But then if you want to go through his letter and find out, okay, so what was, I belong to Paul. What was Paul teaching? What was Apollos teaching? What was Cephas teaching? You can't find him explaining that because he really doesn't put a lot of stock in what their little divisions were. I think he assumes that people are going to have different emphases, and a lot of it is a matter of indifference. It's when he's dealing with some very important issues of what divides the church that he takes a strong stand, particularly division at the Eucharist, public immorality, and that continues to roil our churches. Okay. This is the gate at Selwyn College, just up the road. When I was driving past in the 90s, I would ride my bicycle past this gate almost every day on my way to Tyndale House, the Biblical Research Library. And it has these words, stikite antipisti andrizeste, stand firm in the faith, be courageous. That's almost a motto of Paul's approach to dealing with division, dealing with almost anything. Standing firm in the faith of the crucified Christ, be courageous. I love the fact that that's there on the gate. Okay. Now I'm going to ask you to break up into the three little groups that you had, or this side, and the back. And I'd like you to think about divisions and differences in church communities today, but not at that international level. Not about patriarchs and metropolitans and countries, but about your own experience in your parishes, Orthodox, whatever kind of parishes you've been in, and to think about the various issues that have brought tension in your own life as you think about parish life. We'll spend not a lot of time, 5, 6, 7 minutes, and I'll call you back. But if you break up into those groups, and then we'll just put them down on there on the list. So go ahead, separate. So the next part of this talk is really about finding a better way. As long as you can see the screen, yeah, if you can, so just turn yourself a little bit. Some of you will have heard of Rod Dreher. He is a conservative American columnist. I don't, in fact, I don't often agree with his political commentaries, but he wrote a very good book called The Benedict Option, which has become very popular in the United States, in circles much wider than the Orthodox world. In fact, I have a friend who is a Jewish rabbi in Long Island who assigned this book to his Orthodox Jewish congregation to their book club because he felt that Rod Dreher was addressing issues that he, as an Orthodox rabbi, was facing in his congregation, which is the loss of connection to the authentic Christian tradition. This is what Rod Dreher is talking about. Going back to making sure that congregations know their Christian tradition, which is why he emphasizes things like study and being together in groups and liturgy. And he is afraid that there's a kind of dumbed down version of spirituality that is affecting every single church, not just Orthodox. Whether you're Catholic or whether you're Orthodox Jew, there's a kind of dumbing down and a loss of a sensitivity and just simple knowledge of what's going on in the tradition. But this is not what I want to talk about. What I want to get to is this idea that he has about an emotivist culture. We sometimes get the idea that if we have an issue, all we have to do is talk about it rationally with the other people, and they will, of course, come to understand what true sense is when they come to our opinion. He's saying that that's impossible. He says, culture has become emotivist. If I feel something is true, then it is true. This makes it difficult or impossible to use traditional arguments based on logic. Now you need to listen empathetically to understand why someone believes what they believe. Real life is more complicated than a simple argument. So the aim, he says, and he said he's come to this over a long period. So he said he used to be, I heard this talk about this at a talk at St. Vladimir's. He said he used to be extremely polemical. His whole life shaping as a journalist, a conservative journalist, was polemics and argument. But he eventually came to the conclusion that that wasn't getting him anywhere. The aim, he says now, is to listen empathetically without surrendering your judgment. It's a narrow path. You're listening empathetically, but you're not surrendering your own rational judgment. But you're trying to build a bond, a communion with that person who disagrees with you on perhaps any one of those issues. Now, I want to couple that with somebody else who you may recognize. Frederica Matthews Green has written a number of books, also American, a number of books, A Convert to Orthodoxy, as Rod Dreher. And she had, at the same event at St. Vladimir's, sharing the stage with Rod Dreher, she had another approach, a similar approach to dealing with people who disagree with you. She explained that when she was Episcopalian, she was a feminist. This was in the mid-1960s. And then she discovered Orthodox Christianity, and because she had appreciated Orthodox Christianity, she had a lot of friends from her feminist days, her Episcopal days, who could not understand what the heck she was doing, why she was joining this backwards kind of group. And she had this dilemma because she had a whole set of new thoughts about Christianity, but she wanted to maintain her friendships. The real dividing line came over the issue of abortion. The feminist friends she had completely accepted the whole right to choose logic. She did not, and this was really destroying the friendships that they had. So, as a group of friends, she said, they decided they needed to find a different way. Maybe not to resolve their issues, but at least to maintain some degree of friendship in the midst of very difficult differences. And so they came up with this idea. She said they decided that they would aim to overcome their misunderstandings so we can come to genuine disagreement. So they agreed that they would meet together. Two people, there was a kind of process to this, two people, A and B, with opposed views, let's say pro-abortion, pro-life, would take turns. The first would ask, what experience brought you to this position? The second asks clarifying questions and summarizes respectfully and as accurately as possible what they have heard. And then A accepts or corrects B's summary. So you're trying to listen to what the other person is saying about what brought them to their position. You are not arguing with them. Then they switch roles. They focus on stories of personal experience. They don't try to persuade the other person. And they ask sincere, not rhetorical questions for which you don't know the answer. And they found that they didn't end up converting each other, but they did remain in a strong degree of friendship, understanding each other just a little bit better about why they had come to very different conclusions. And they found that they had been missing a lot of information. They didn't know why the other person had taken such a radically different view. As soon as they skirted the rational argumentation process, they found they were coming to a much deeper appreciation for each other. So I don't want to do this now. I think it would be a little too difficult. And it also could be quite emotional, because we all come to positions based on sometimes very difficult experiences in our own life. And it's not always easy to talk about that. So you need a kind of nice group of friends to make this possible. But I would argue that the kind of approach that Rod Dreher is putting forward, that this is an emotivist culture, it's not just a rational, argumentative culture, and the method that Frederica Matthews Green is offering could help at every level of difference and division. So whether you're talking about patriarchs at the international level or people in a parish, if you are facing difficulties, intractable difficulties, that are tending to divide you to such a point where you don't want to be with each other at all, this kind of approach could help build a better sense of understanding. Maybe not resolve the issue. I think you have to get away from maybe resolving, but living with a degree of tension while still valuing that other person. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think that's a sign of actually mental health, is to be able to live with that kind of mental and spiritual health of keeping that together. Okay, so I want to ask for volunteers to do that right now. But I do want to move on to the last section of this talk, because not just because I've been working on this book on divine guidance, but because when you are trying to decide what's important, what's maybe slightly important, and what's really not important, you do have to draw on your own sense of God's direction. Of God, what is God's will here? And not just be driven by, someone else said earlier in today's discussions, that ultimately as Christians we're wanting to be guided by God's will. I mean, in a sense, that's what distinguishes us. That we add not just our own thoughts, but we're looking for God's direction in our life. Sometimes that direction comes very clearly. Paul had a very clear message. When my sister died a few years ago of cancer. It was a terrible end, but she had been very, very healthy. Went to gyms all the time. She looks great, muscular and all that. In fact, she thought she had just pulled a muscle at the gym, and then they discovered it was cancer. And she told one of my very good friends, a priest, she says, I've kind of been ignoring God for a long time, but I told him the other day, you got my attention now. God is trying to get our attention, and it's all ultimately for our good and compassion. How do we understand this? It's difficult. But as Christians, we are looking to do God's will. that prayer for the beginning of the day. Teach me to pray. Teach me your will. Okay? Now, that's very general, but I want to talk about something quite specific about discerning God's will. There are a lot of people in the world who have experiences of God, right? There is a particular religious experience research center, used to be at Oxford, now it's at the University of Wales. They've spent their life gathering together accounts of experiences of God. And in the early 1970s, as this project was getting underway in 60s, early 70s, getting underway in Oxford, they were interviewing various people about this project. So they had this, even at that time, they had this kind of collection of raw material of religious experiences. And they were interviewing a few people to find out what to do with this raw material. And among the people they interviewed were then a simple Kallistos were Archimandrite. He might not have even been Archimandrite at that time, but he was there in Oxford. They interviewed him. And separately, these are long interviews that were later published in a book in the early 70s. And they also interviewed Father Revd, who I mentioned earlier, the one who wrote the book about communion in the Messiah, who died in, I think, 1980, 81. And they both had some extremely interesting things to say about what you do with the raw material of some sort of religious experience that you might have. And it's all about discernment and divine guidance. So let me just share with you, and this is in your packets there. He said this, Father Revd, many times in my life when I have asked for guidance, asking for an answer in concrete terms, this has been given to me in words. Words innerly spoken without a sound, but in a way which left me in no doubt about the superhuman origin of those answers. I have some criteria which allowed me to discriminate such words from other words, purely human words. And these are the criteria that he gave. Is it repeated? Is it in the style of God? He said that God speaks in very short sentences, authoritative sentences, which puts some of us in trouble. What do others tell you about it? And what fruit does it bring? Now, very interestingly, again, they're interviewed separately, and they didn't collaborate on their answers. Metropolitan Kallistos had very similar tests. And you might expect that from two people who are deeply grounded in the one Orthodox tradition. But here's his Metropolitan Kallistos' test. Is it repeated? Same as Father Revd. Is it repeated? If you're just getting some fleeting thought coming through, but if something keeps coming back to you, what fruit does it bring? Is it convincing? That's similar to Father Lev's in the style of God. Is it convincing? And what does a spiritually experienced person tell you about the experience? In this same book, Metropolitan Kallistos says, we ought to impress on people that Christianity is not just a question of ritual, moral rules, and abstract adherence to verbal doctrinal formulations. Each is called to relive the tradition in his own personal experience. We should tell people that remarkable experiences do happen, and that while they may be a delusion from the devil, they may be a gift from God. We should, however, always be seeking not God's gifts, but God himself. The experiences are important, not in isolation, but because they may point beyond themselves to him. There is an ever-present danger of reducing religion to a philosophical theory or moral code, whereas the primary purpose of the Church on earth is to bring people through prayer to a direct apprehension of the living God. Of course, such apprehension should then transform our personal relations to others and inspire us to serve them in a new way. But if in our religious teaching we speak only of service to others, divorced from the direct apprehension of God through prayer, then we reduce the church to a kind of social welfare organization. I mean, Mother Teresa of Calcutta said, we are not social workers. We are Christians who do social work. If someone is sincerely pursuing the spiritual way, then gradually, through prayer, study, fasting, obedience, and active service to others, he will develop a spiritual taste which directly and intuitively enables him to distinguish the genuine or divine from the counterfeit or demonic, just as our natural taste enables us immediately to distinguish wholesome food from food that has gone moldy. So, if we go back to the basic question that we've been asking here at this whole conference, and more specifically about parish, parochial, community life, and the differences and divisions, and how you deal with all of that, divine guidance and discernment is absolutely crucial. Because we're trying to figure out what to do with all these kinds of things. Are they things that we just say, well, okay, Jane likes that way, Jim likes this way. It really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. Or is it something that we put our effort into, as Paul did in Galatians, where he said, who has bewitched you? Where he felt that the attack on the heart of the gospel was such that this had to be forcefully attacked. Is it a church dividing issue? Or is it something that you can live with? When I was, again, back in the Federation in the late 90s, early 2000s, every 2 weeks in the Theological Federation, there's a joint worship where a different community in the Federation is responsible. Anglican, whether it's Westcott House, slightly higher, or Ridley Hall, which is more evangelical, or Wesley, the Methodist, the Catholics at Margaret Beaufort Institute, as it was then, and the Orthodox. And at one point, it was during Lent, it was the turn of Westcott House. And they brought out, they were doing a Eucharist, but with a liturgical dance. And there were 3 very attractive women students who came out wearing very diaphanous blue sort of Isadora Duncan gowns, and they were doing a liturgical dance. This is about the cross. It was Lent. I'm Orthodox. I'm thinking, what is this? What am I doing here? But then, at the very end, I saw a number of the women in the congregation particularly hugging the dancers. And it was very clear that they were all very moved by what they had seen and experienced. And I realized then that not everything is going to move me, and not everything that I'm moved by is going to move somebody else. And it requires a certain suspension of, I don't know what, of judgment, suspension of judgment to say, I don't know everything. To me, that was one of those, I can let them do that dance. I'm not going to do it. It would be very unpretty. But others are going to do it, and will find it very uplifting. Alternatively, I remember a friend of mine at St. Vladimir Seminary, she was also studying at General Seminary in New York, and she invited one of her friends, to come up to St. Vladimir Seminary for Holy Week. Now, at St. Vladimir Seminary, it's a seminary. The music is fantastic. The liturgy is done absolutely perfectly. The flowers were magnificent. And she was sure that her friend would come and just be blown away and convert to Orthodoxy the next day. Well, he didn't. He liked it. He thought that's nice for her. But it didn't have the same impact on him. It's a strange business, the church's life that we're in, and what moves people and doesn't move people, and there we need genuine discernment. So what I'd like to do for your last 15 minutes is, in your groups, just talk about perhaps some time where issues of discernment, divine guidance, may have impacted in your own life, give you one direction or another direction. If you don't have such experiences, that's fine, but there are thousands of other people who have been, whose record of experiences have been recorded, and maybe you've had something that you would like to talk about with others in the group. So why not do that? And that'll be the end of this particular session.